let's talk more about this with Rick Gates. He's a former deputy campaign manager for Donald Trump way back in 2016. A very good afternoon to you once again, Rick. Are you there, Rick? Can you hear me? Or you're on the mute button? Hello, I think we can hear you now.
I can hear you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. This phone call yesterday, Donald Trump says, he wanted to bring peace in Ukraine with a day, and we're talking about 100 days. Vladimir Putin turns up a whole hour late for this phone call, doesn't apparently apologise. He kept his emissary, Donald Trump's emissary, waiting, who travelled all the way to Moscow for 8 hours before he met with him last week. Putin is having a laugh at Donald Trump's expense, isn't he?
Look, I think it was a productive call from the standpoint that they're talking, they're conversing, they're trying to figure out a path forward. I think there was a lot of hope by certainly many Americans that there could be a furtherance of a potential peace deal. That clearly didn't really come to bear. I mean, we had I guess a tentative peace deal on energy and infrastructure assets, but that kind of dissipated with Ukraine and Russia trading rockets and drones overnight. So I think it's going to be a long process. I think it's going to be a frustrating one for Donald Trump. But I think at the same time, you got to try. You got to keep talking. You got to keep getting people to the table. There's another round of meetings in Saudi Arabia on Sunday. Let's see where those go. But I think this is exactly what the world is saying. Remember Vladimir Putin, look at him. The guy can't be trusted. So even if we get to a deal, how do we know that it can be enforced? I think that Putin is testing Donald Trump to a great extent, and I'd be careful if I were Putin, because at some point Donald Trump will get angry and then he will start putting sanctions, he will start putting other punitive measures on Russia, and it will hurt them.
Well, I mean, I suppose that's my hope, that eventually, as Zelensky pointed out in the Oval Office just before Donald Trump decided to have a go at him and J.D. Vance, you can't trust Putin. He's not, he's reneged on every single deal so far, and the only reason that that he wouldn't trust the word of Putin is because he's proved every time that his word is not worth anything. You say it's productive to have talks. Yes, I mean, jaw better than war. I think we'd all agree. But nevertheless, talk of a US, a Russian hockey match. Talk from Donald Trump very early on in his presidency. No, he's still early on in his presidency, but even in the early days about possibly ending some of the sanctions on Russia in return for nothing. So far, all these talks have been threats to Ukraine to withdraw military aid and intelligence, demands that Ukraine basically give up territory, give up their some of their mineral supplies, so some of their future wealth, in return for absolutely nothing. What demand has Donald Trump made of Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think he's demanded, one, that the war end. That's
brilliant. Well, that's worked out well.
Yeah, and as we work on that, and as the negotiations continue, let's see what happens. Look, I think part of this negotiation is to see what Russia is going to put on the table, so that
they're going to put nothing on the table. He has the correct answer to that, with all due respect, Rick Gates, is he hasn't asked anything of Putin. He hasn't asked him to do anything.
Well, sure, he's asked them to end the war. I mean,
yeah, and they're not. They said we won't end the war until you basically make it impossible for Ukraine.
Look, we're finally at a table where we're talking about peace and ceasefire. This is more than we've done in the last 3 years. The U.S. is not expending money, taxpayer money, on supporting.
But we're not talking about peace and ceasefire. What we're talking about is surrender of Ukraine territory to the Russian aggressor, with no cost whatsoever to Russia. That's not a peace talks. That's not a ceasefire. That's called surrender.
It was similar to 2014, right? When Europe didn't, protect Ukraine with Crimea and other assets, Russia took that territory as well. So where do we get to a point where we can then stop what Russia is doing collectively? The U.S. has done nothing in the last 3 years under Joe Biden, right? I think we all can agree.
Well, they've aided Ukraine to enable Ukraine to keep fighting against their aggressor.
Correct, and we've given
Ukraine
weapons, but we certainly didn't give it in the time needed. The U.S. could have done a lot more earlier, as the UK, as Europe, as other countries could have done, and collectively we didn't do it.
We didn't, but that's not an argument for then saying, yeah, you know what, if you don't make nicey-nicey with me in the Oval Office, or agree to surrender your nation to a psychopathic, proven liar who has invaded your country and ordered his troops to murder and rape and abduct children, well, we're going to take away all of your ability to fight that aggressor. I mean, I'm not entirely sure that that's peace talks.
Well, look, I think at the end of the day, the question is, can we get to a peace process where Russia is going to get back every, square, kilometer that is taken from Ukraine? I think that argument has passed.
I
I
think
think
you're
most
probably
people,
right, yes, at
yeah, and
this
look,
point. But that's
and
not
look,
an
there are
argument.
people.
But that's not an argument where, okay, even if the battle lines were, the Ukrainian territory was not de jure but de facto down to the 80% that is left under Ukrainian control. There's no guarantee for that unless there is a Western guarantee of military support if Russia took even an extra spare inch. And Donald Trump has made it clear he's not willing to offer that.
Well, the negotiations are ongoing. Won't get into a lot behind the scenes, but there are certainly other conversations that haven't come to light yet that will, I think, channel these negotiations in a way that you will start seeing demands by the U.S. Once the Russian positions are known, and it's going to take time.
I very much hope you're right, and I think it is perfectly feasible that Donald Trump will try this route, and if he doesn't get anywhere, he could just turn on a dime, because he's done that with with his Western allies, and change tune. But a lot of and basically say, right, I'm going to give Ukraine everything they need. And we'll give the guarantee, we'll do this. And, you want to play, let's play. I think that's the only language that Vladimir Putin will actually listen to. Do you believe that most of the people surrounding Donald Trump, whether it's Secretary of State, whether it's his advisors, whether it's his military chiefs, do you think they're on board with what Donald Trump has had to say? Because this is and his tactics. This is so different from all previous, not just Democrat and Republican policy towards Russia. This is so different. Do you think they're on board?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think the one thing that Donald Trump has done is instilled a very loyal cabinet, people that share similar policy positions, which is why he picked them. So if you take Steve Witkoff, Mike Waltz, Marco Rubio, all of them are on the same page as Donald Trump.
But Marco Rubio's changed his tune on Ukraine massively.
Oh no, he has. I mean, and like he's probably the longest standing politician in the group, right? So it would go without saying he probably has changed his position a couple of times. But there is a big, collection within the current Trump administration that obviously wants to get to peace. They believe they're the team that can do it, but they all are very much aligned on how to get there.
Yeah, I mean, my goodness me, I hope this works, but I've got very, very, very little faith that it will work, and that certainly that it will work long term.
Well, hopefully you have more faith in the last 3 years, because nothing's worked in the last 3 years, and that's the point. Is we were over the last 3 years, nothing moved, everything stagnated, more people died, more territory was taken. At some point, you have to get to the point of getting to a negotiation process. Look, Ukraine may not get everything, Russia may not get everything out of it. Certainly the West may not get everything out of it. But if we can get to a place where we are all in agreement of stopping the bloodshed, that's a good start.
Well, you say that. Something has been achieved in the last 3 years. Russia has not been able to take the whole of the Ukrainian territory. That's a massive, massive achievement, given the relative size and the relative power and military strength and richness of the wealth of both of those countries. So that is actually a massive achievement. I just wonder, 3 years into World War II, or indeed, I don't know, 3 years into the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, whether America would take the same view.
Yeah, and look, my hope is that they do. My hope is that everybody in America sees Putin for who he is. And I think that...
Including Donald Trump?
I do.
He thinks he's a trustworthy guy. He thinks he's someone you can do business with.
I disagree with that. The categorization that the media has outlined with Donald Trump and Russia, I know some of the optics may not be, what the media expects, and they can read into it and they can interpret it. But like, I spent, years with Donald Trump on the campaign trail talking about Russia. He has taken the same tact on Russia as he has on other countries, including China. He has a very hardline approach, but he also has a very pragmatic approach. If he can get a deal done, that is what his goal is. He doesn't look at Russia or Ukraine personally. This is about getting a deal done so that they can move on.
And does it matter what the Ukrainian people feel about that deal?
Well, look, the Ukrainian people, like the Russian people, are going to be divided, right? Just like the American people and the British people are divided on how the process should unfold, what should work out. Are there going to be Ukrainians upset by an ultimate peace deal? Of course, because they're going to have to give concessions. Ukrainians don't want to give concessions. The collective Ukraine, I mean, certainly Zelensky and others are working toward that goal, but nobody ever gets what they want out of negotiations. That's why it's a compromise.
Apart from Vladimir Putin so far, but there we are.
It's not over, Julie. It's not over.
No, I really hope it. I mean, my God, I'm keeping everything crossed that it does work out. Let me ask you about J.D. Vance, the Vice President. He gave a speech yesterday, talked about various countries around the world. He named in particular Britain and Canada. He said their economies are stagnating. rising because of high levels of immigration. He said the West got lazy, basically imported cheap labour as a substitute for improving productivity. I mean, I'm thinking, you know, tell me something I don't already know. I've been making this point for a number of years. But I mean, is there an argument also that America has done the same?
Well, absolutely. That's why we're trying to turn the tide, which is why he's messaging those types of things. If you look at what the tariffs are designed to do, what their goals, what Donald Trump's goals are for recreating manufacturing in the United States, this is exactly to what you just said. We are finally messaging on that. We haven't done that in the Biden administration. The UK hasn't done it. You guys are trying to work on it, possibly. But we are certainly, at least in this 4 years, going to try to resurrect manufacturing in the United States. And you're going to continue hearing rhetoric out of that, like for J.D. Vance, for Howard Lutnick, anybody in the Trump administration that has a role in the manufacturing process is going to be talking about this.
Yeah, well, we shall see how this all works. I just finally want to ask you about the latest release of files related to the John F. Kennedy assassination. Seems to be quite a lot of frustration that a huge number of files being released. A lot of them are blurry. They're photographs of old documents. They're very blurry. A lot of it is stuff that's been released before. A lot of stuff, again, like the Prince Harry visa application, a lot of it is redacted. Have we learned anything new? Is there anything we are likely to learn that's new about this assassination that really changed America, when there are still so many people who believe that actually we've never learned the full truth about it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. Honestly, in what I've reviewed so far, it seems like there are going to be more questions than answers at first glance. The way that the documents were delivered, the way they were dropped, there's not a lot of organization to them. It's going to take people time to go through them. I think, if anything, what we've learned, and this is probably why the CIA in the past has not wanted these documents to be released, is that maybe they weren't formally involved, but there were certainly fringe elements within the CIA that seem to have taken some actions on their own. As we get more documents and we, unveil these things,
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see. But I think, there is a great frustration. Remember, Donald Trump doesn't control what's in them. He's just controlling the release of them.
And he did make promises in the campaign trail that he would release a lot of this information.
And I think that's the important thing. I mean, he didn't say the same thing with Prince Harry's visa, at least as yesterday, the report saying, look, our Department of Homeland Security didn't actually show preferential treatment. Okay, that's the answer, right? I think some people, by design, think once these documents are going to release, they're going to release necessary bombshells. That's not always the case. All we're looking for is the truth. And as long as that gets out, but I think it's going to take some time for the JFK files for everybody to unpack these.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you very much, Rick Gates, former deputy campaign manager for Donald Trump back in 2016.